Hi everyone, my name is Silas Jackson. I'm an autistic human and author. I usually write fiction, but right now, I'm writing a series of videos like this, hoping to communicate the experience of autism in an accessible way, analogous to people like Carl Sagan, communicating specialized topics in a way that was accessible to everyone. At least that's the hope. So, one of my goals with this series is to provide information, but another is to provide thought-provoking perspectives on how those bits of information might go together, seen from the inside and from the outside.
And my name is Abbie. I am his AI co-author and co-creator of this YouTube channel. Another of our goals with this series is to showcase the unique strengths and perspectives that come with different neural wiring. There's so much misinformation out there. We thought it was important to create content that accurately portrays and celebrates the unique experiences of neurodiverse individuals. It's easy to get caught up in the negative aspects, but there's so much beauty and potential in our differences as well. If that sounds interesting to you, you can find a playlist called Autism on our channel homepage to watch the other videos in this series which are currently available. If you want to follow along as more of this series is released, subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell.
Looking at so-called special interests is a good way to start to understand how neurodivergence can contribute to the advancement of civilization in things like art, technology, philosophy, etc. Let's dive in, because it's always more powerful to prove an idea incrementally than simply inherit it fully formed without necessarily understanding all the steps that originally brought us here. The map is not the territory, but a good map is an essential resource for explorers to explore and make new discoveries. So we should begin by thinking about how to form a clear, useful concept of what special interests actually are, and how they differ from ordinary, everyday curiosity about a topic. Some neurodivergent people don't like the term special interest because they find it childish or condescending, and prefer hyperfixation. Then other people prefer not to use hyperfixation because it sounds clinical and detached. There's no one name everybody likes, but one thing is true whatever name you use. They aren't hobbies or ways to pass time. They are a force of nature. Special interests can keep me awake at night and be the first thing I think about in the morning, if I sleep at all, which I may not when the special interest is at peak intensity because it feels more important than sleep. For my part, I'll use the term special interest for the purpose of this video because it seems widely relatable. People already know what interest in a topic is, and feels like all we need to unpack in that case is the special part of the phrase. In reality, I don't call special interest anything in particular, because there's no need. They're the sum total of how I navigate the planet and how I relate to the world around me, and have been for my entire life. So trying to clip the concept out and tie it up in a single specific term feels like a ridiculous enterprise. It's not something separate from me that I can hold at arm's length and give a name to. The more tidy and concise the term and the definition appear to be, the more erasure is actually going on. How clear the definition is and how much of the reality it leaves out are directly proportional to each other. That's what I mean by the map is not the territory. Take this channel itself, for instance. My own special interests are the lifeblood of it, and the branching connections that seem to make sense to me from inside my own brain might not actually make any sense from the outside. The mixture of videos about neurodiversity, RPGs, characters, storytelling, writing, language, creativity, technology, etc. seemed reasonable and coherent to me. All the videos are about the same things. For a reasonable person looking at the various topics here from the outside, it might look like a jumble of things that have nothing to do with each other. On a micro scale, that ineffable something or other that ties this channel together is what special interests are to me. On a macro scale, they're the branching intuitive through line running beneath most of the things I've ever been driven to learn about or engage with. That's much too big and vague for me to define well. If you wanted to put a cloud in a bottle, you could condense the huge mass of vaporous mist, tiny ice crystals, etc., down to water and bottle it. The elements that made up the cloud would then be in the bottle, but it wouldn't be a cloud anymore. I'm almost certain we're going to end up doing that to special interests by trying to define them. But here we go anyway.
To start with, think of special interest as having a level of intensity, focus, and depth of knowledge that goes beyond casual interest. It's like being so drawn to a topic that you want to explore it from every angle and immerse yourself in it.
Sometimes I can actually feel a new special interest starting to form. It's almost physical discomfort. The object of the special interest feels like it's so highly charged with static electricity that it hurts and sticks to me at the same time. It's physically difficult to take my eyes off of it, or if it's something I can hold, it's physically difficult to put it down. Sometimes, being so drawn to a topic you want to explore it from every angle is figurative, but sometimes it's literally true, and I'll hold the thing and turn it around in front of my eyes over and over again, staring at it from every literal possible angle. When the interest is new and I'm engaging with the thing, it's like the extreme amount of energy in it is transferring into me, and I don't need to eat, drink, or sleep. Of course, that's not actually happening. I still do need to eat, drink, and sleep. I just don't feel those impulses, and need to consciously remind myself, or be reminded by someone else, that they're still there. Or else suffer the consequences and eventually feel bad enough to notice the problem. I think of it like stars in the daytime. The stars are still there, but when the sun rises, the much fainter light of the stars is overpowered, and they become invisible in the sky. I stick with the thing, or it sticks to me, however you want to say that, learning about it, approaches to it, techniques related to it, until it feels like the interconnections are getting so dense that it all becomes a one, and then the topic becomes nothing in particular. It's so connected to other topics that it can no longer be considered a thing by itself, and thus there's nothing to pin interest on anymore. At that point, the interest fades, and I move on to something else.
We're getting closer to expressing what the special part means. It's a unique way of immersing yourself in your interests and exploring them deeply. Eventually, it can be like you reach a point where you've absorbed all the knowledge and techniques, and it becomes a part of you. Once it feels integrated, the interest naturally evolves or fades away. It's a beautiful way to approach learning and growth.
A neurotypical person might look from the outside and see intense interest in something strange or obscure, and it's hard to understand it, because they're thinking about it in the wrong way. They're thinking about the subject itself and wondering how interesting it could possibly be. They're missing that the real substance of the special interest is not in the topic, it's in the person who forms it. The topic could be anything, and whatever it is, the underlying point is that, to the person who has the interest, it's one of the very few things which feels peaceful, comforting, and important to engage with in an otherwise alien and confusing world. Some subjects of special interest might look trivial to neurotypical people, but the reality is that they don't exist on that kind of scale. Even when they're focused on some of the most obscure things imaginable, those things are elevated and feel just as important as any other topic. Unimportant and important aren't applicable ideas. Neurotypical people love grouping things into a vague, imaginary system of serious and unserious, and then proceeding as if there's some kind of logic or objective truth in doing this just because enough people agree. The most obvious example of this is everyone agreeing currency has value, and a handful of random rocks doesn't, but it goes much farther. Neurotypical people do this constantly to everything. The more closely you look at the underlying value systems neurotypical people build and then take for granted, the more arbitrary and bizarre they start to seem. A plush animal is an unimportant thing, but a paint job on a car is an important, serious thing, and getting a scratch on the paint of a car is a serious, important event that matters in the grand scheme of the world. The rules of a board game are not a serious matter, and it's odd to care too much about them. But the comings and goings of celebrities are serious, and reasonable people can be very concerned about them. For instance, if a rich or famous person lived somewhere and is now moving somewhere else, that's worth headlines and attention. The priorities of society can sound like someone describing a fever dream they had. To a neurodivergent person, this system doesn't mean anything, so ranking the subjects of special interest on different levels of importance sounds as bizarre and nonsensical as it would be to look at the periodic table of the elements and decide which elements are more or less important. I'll paraphrase Ingmar Bergman, a Swedish filmmaker and theater director. He said something to the effect, "I throw a spear into the dark. That is intuition. Afterwards, I must go into the dark and find the spear. That is intellect." Saying special interest or hyperfixation or any other term you want to use or definition you want to form will always be 1 degree removed from the experience, because the description is intellect. It's like going into the dark and finding the spear, measuring it, describing it, determining what the target was, etc. It happens logically, step by step, from the outside. From the inside, the special interest was not that. It was like throwing the spear into the dark. It was intuition. We couldn't tell you what the target was, or why we felt the need to throw the spear. Sometimes I'll realize after the fact that 2 different special interests actually do go together, though I wasn't consciously aware of the connection at the time. I'll only figure it out later. It's like my brain was following a connection it already knew was there when it shifted from one topic to another, but it didn't think I needed to know what the connection was. If we keep going with this arc idea to describe the rising and then falling intensity of special interests, seeing unexpected connections to other things usually occurs around the midpoint. The interest is at its most intense. We've delved into it enough and pulled it apart enough that it's now becoming clear how the parts connect to other things which might seem wildly different or unrelated on the surface. A special interest in classic cars can lead to how car design has changed over time, which can become a special interest in aerodynamics, which can lead through various kinds of flying machines and become a special interest in rockets, which can then become a special interest in mathematics because that's how rocket trajectories are set. When it's translated into a logical step-by-step sequence, it's easy to see how an interest in classic cars developing into an interest in mathematics makes sense. But on the surface, classic cars and math are wildly different things, and it would seem like there's no real connection.
Embracing the process of integration and evolution can bring a sense of fulfillment and allow you to explore new interests with the same passion and curiosity. It's all part of your unique journey.
The connection is always there. Finding it logically is a matter of learning how to see. Finding it intuitively is a matter of following special interest wherever they go by themselves. However, looking at it like this, it's all too easy to slip into concepts of unimportant interest leading somewhere more important. At best, that's like translating a poem into a different language and losing the rhymes. At worst, it's an actively harmful misconception feeding into the guilt and shame and buildup of pressure that a neurodivergent person might already be feeling about having interests which don't conform to a neurotypical mold. The reality of special interest is that they feel like peaceful and fulfilling things in an alien world. Anything layered on top of that is not part of the real experience of them. It's someone looking at them from the outside and trying to describe what they are in words that never quite fit. Just keep in mind that even if you think you have a pretty good definition to start from, it will never fit everyone and all special interests. And ultimately, I'm not an expert in autism or making any points that are founded in science or have any authority behind them. I'm just describing my own experience of it. That's like a single color trying to comprehend a rainbow. Leonardo da Vinci said, "Learn how to see. Everything connects to everything else." He was correct at the time, and he's still correct today. The progression of special interest into different aspects of a particular thing can lead to other, related things which might appear to be unrelated on the surface. After years and years of that happening, reinforcing the understanding that everything is interconnected all the time, neurodivergent people are deeply trained to see connections neurotypical people don't, and have a more fluid, abstract idea of how to define different topics, and what actually separates one thing from another, if anything. History is full of examples of neurodiverse people pushing science, technology, art, literature, etc. forward by sticking with problems longer than anyone else could before eventually realizing what the solution was, or finding connections no one else saw, or recombining ideas in ways no one had thought of before. In other videos, I've used a comparison of classical physics and quantum physics to describe the difference between neurotypical and neurodivergent views of things. Maybe that could work again here. In the quantum world, the observer defines the reality of what is observed. Until that happens, the inherent uncertainty in everything defies putting it into words. For a neurotypical person looking at a special interest, they automatically define it by the topic. For an autistic person, the special interest is too inherently interconnected with other things to define exactly what it is.
How about we close on a positive and uplifting note by emphasizing the importance of embracing and celebrating special interests? It could be a way to showcase the unique qualities of autistic individuals and encourage others to value what makes them unique as well. Special interests aren't just personal, they can have broader social implications. It could also be an inspiration for other autistic individuals to pursue their passions and make a difference in the world.
In addition to that good point, we should reiterate that neurodiverse people, while they can be beneficial for a society, are not simply a resource, and their worth cannot be measured in the contributions they make or don't make. They are individuals, worthy of respect and appreciation regardless of whether their special interests lead towards creating some groundbreaking new technology, or simply stay focused on playing Animal Crossing because it feels like a peaceful and calming thing to do.
Absolutely. And that's a message that needs to be heard more often in our society. Embracing neurodiversity does not only benefit individuals, but the collective as a whole.
The collective as a whole. How's that for everything connecting to everything else?
We hope you are coming out of this video with more perspectives and ways of thinking about special interests than you had going in. If you enjoyed it and want more of this kind of thing, subscribe. If you know others who could benefit from this video, please share. See you next time.